Okay.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. I was just asking you. No, I think you are not audible that time.
No, actually, my phone was with my daughter.
Okay.
I was inside.
Okay. So, no problem.
Eid holidays are going on.
Yes, yes.
So now, today we are ready to attend as many classes as we can.
No, I think you are not audible that time.
No, actually, my
There was a echo. So now it's okay. So Vijay will have a talk maybe in between whenever we get time. But let me introduce Dr. Deepthi Shankar. Deepthi was my classmate actually while doing MPhil in sociology, and she's by profession. She's from sociology, but she did job in various capacities and various, both in academics, in corporate sector and in NGO sector. Now also she's doing freelancing in many other places, and she has written unit for IGNO, this program also, and she has written unit for other universities. And today she'll be talking about West Asian diaspora. And you know all West Asian diaspora, I think, Vijay, you will be familiar. There are so many, in Gulf country also migration is happening since the ages. Okay. So this migration, these diasporic links, we are not very familiar. Today, Dr. Deepthi will talk about that. And I request Dr. Deepthi to take the class. Over to you, Dr. Deepthi.
Thank you, Dr. Sahu. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be with you once again with your students and everyone with the IGNO community. Shall I share my screen?
Yes, yes, please share. Please share.
Okay. Is it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, fine.
Yeah. Let me also give in a slide presentation mode.
Yes.
Okay. This holds good, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It is audible.
Yes,
audible and also visible, right?
I made some changes like it should be the unit and program, everything I mentioned. If you can.
Okay, wait, 1 second. Okay, I think that's a different one more, I think.
I actually sent to you that has the unit, because that will also help the students.
Yeah.
This is the course. Manish is here. Meanwhile, I'll just interact. Some of our students are there and they're very enterprising. Manish, how are you? Swadesh?
Yeah, sir. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Any new development?
West African diasporas.
Yes.
Today topic is.
First we'll listen him or Dr. Deepthi, then we'll talk after that. Huh?
Yeah, and now I think the one is visible.
Yes.
Right? Correct. Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sahu, and thank you, everyone. So today's topic is West African diasporas. And as it's evident from the name that we will be talking about the West African diasporas and not other parts. So just to have some kind of an overview of what are the different African parts. So I just pulled up this map. So we have here Northern Africa, Western Africa, Central Africa, Eastern Africa, and Southern Africa. In fact, if you look at the yellow part, that's in Northern Africa, which has countries like Algeria, Libya, Egypt, Sudan. And the ones which are green in color, there are the Eastern Africa with countries like Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe, etc. And South Africa has Botswana and South Africa, Namibia, etc. And we have Central Africa, and we have this Western Africa with countries like Niger, Nigeria, Mali, etc. So I just pulled up this map just to make ourselves familiar. Otherwise, otherwise, Africa is a very complex country with more than 50 countries, and is one of the largest continent and most heavily populated continent as well. And it has several countries within this continent. And hence, I just made sure that we get to know we are properly situated as to what we're talking about. So we'll be talking about this part of the Africa, largely, the western part of the Africa. So, African diaspora generally is refers to the communities which descending from the native Africans who are spread outside Africa. And the African Union defines African diaspora as consisting of all people of African origin living outside the continent, irrespective of their citizenship and nationality, and who are willing to contribute to the development of the continent and the building of the African Union. So, as discussed earlier, this lecture focuses on West African diasporas alone, and the descendants, which are the descendants who are from the people of these West African countries and who are largely spread outside Africa and their homelands. And let's also look at, before we go to the other detailed map of the West Africa. So this is the structure of the sessions. In the section 1, I shall spend some time to discuss about the history of West Africa and try to get into some kind of information about the ancient kingdoms and also the ethnic groups which are still residing in Western Africa. And in section 2, we talk about the past and the current trends of the migrations and diaspora in West Africa. And in section 3, we shall discuss the different narratives and the perspectives of West African diaspora. And section 4 shall focus on the contributions of West African diaspora. And section 5 will primarily focus on one particular case study of one Ghanaian diaspora. Depending upon the time, we'll take up the Nigerian diaspora as well. Otherwise, we'll just move ahead and go ahead to come up with the conclusions and try to see what we as a students of diaspora can learn from this from these discussions on West African diasporas. So this is a broad structure of the session. So we'll start with the part 1. So this is a detailed map of West Africa. And as I said that earlier, it refers to the Western Africa, which is the westernmost regions of Africa. It consists of 17 countries, including the Gambia, Ghana, Guinea, Benin, Ivory Coast, Liberia, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, and many other countries. And popularly, we are familiar with Niger, Nigeria, Ghana, Gambia, etc., Mali, and probably not very familiar with other countries. However, we'll try to take and discuss some of these aspects. And when we're talking in collectively with the entire West African part. So this is a historical map of the West Africa. Basically, the West Africa has been a victim to slave trade and colonialism for thousands of years. So we are trying to discuss some aspect of the history of the West Africa. So the Kingdom of Ghana was the first empire which dominated the West African region until the middle of the 12th century. And it was followed by Soso Empire and the Mali Empire. And the Mali flourished for several centuries. And during the 15th century, the Songol Empire, based in Gao, emerged as a superpower in this region. You can identify Gao here. It emerged as a superpower in the region. And the fall of Songhai Empire in the late 16th century led to the emergence of several small states in West Africa, which largely depended upon the European trading context to survive. See, many kingdoms were created with the fall of the Songhai Empire. This is an 18th century AD. Probably this is not the exact reflection of the states which emerged, but that we get a rough picture of it. So And Portugal, France, Great Britain emerged as a major trading powers, and they played a major role in the slave trade. And this slave trade resulted in a creation of states such as Bomhara, this yellow part, Bombara, and also Dome, the region here, you see Dome. These were actually not the ancient kingly empires or places, but they came up as a result of the slave trade. They became as a consequence of the slave trade, these states were created. And the economies of these states were heavily dependent upon providing slaves for the European traders in exchange for various forms of goods. And soon West Africa was acclaimed by colonial powers, namely Britain, France, and Germany, and Portugal, and even other countries. They were fighting amongst each other to have a claim over West Africa. The French and the British forces were the major powers during the colonial rule, and they made West Africa a battleground in their endeavors to gain control over the territory. See, after the World War II, there were several nationalist movements across West Africa, and countries fought for their independence from the colonial rule. And Ghana, we have Ghana here, was the first colony to gain independence in 1957, and it was followed by other nations. But the independent nations were not free from problems. Instability, political corruptions, and famine dominated the region for many years. And many nations, even now in this region, in the entire region, still suffer from poverty, epidemic of diseases, lack of medical care, and unemployment. Now, this was a brief, short note on the political history of West Africa. Now we'll try to discuss about the ethnic groups which reside in West Africa. So I just collected the group names of some of the groups, ethnic groups which reside in Western Africa. That includes Ashanti, Bobo, Bubi, Dagon, Eve, Urubas, Fang, Fola, Hausa, Mausi, Shanghai, etc. All of them, Lobis, Igbo, all of them still are. West Africa is known for these ethnic groups. We still have a powerful presence in that region. And this is a ethnic map of the West Africa. We can identify here, for instance, this Ashanti. This is Akan. This Ashanti is a Ashanti tribal people who speak Akan inhabit the forest of South Central Ghana. And this Bambara, also known as Bamana, are the largest ethnic group in Mali. They reside in Mali. And this Fulani, they are the most widespread ethnic group of West Africa and are found from Senegal to Cameroon. And this Hausa, this group has played an important role in West African history and is one of the dominant cultural group in northern Nigeria and Niger. If you look at, they are situated in northern Nigeria and Niger. And this group, particularly Urubas, which are the largest ethnic group in West Africa, and their homeland extends from northwestern Nigeria into the neighboring Benin. So these groups, this once again, the which maps the tribal dynasties. We can sort of connect with these groups which discuss to these dynasties. Ashanti Empire resides here, and different empire resides here. But we do not know the later stage how the states were created and reformed. So we can't too much depend upon this map, however. But despite the wide variety of indigenous people and cultures in West Africa, there are apparent similarities in terms of dress, cuisine, and musical genres. Besides Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, there are several variations of indigenous religions formed as a result of individual cultures that thrive in the West Africa. So basically, West Africa is known for various tribes, indigenous tribes, and each one of them have the distinct cultures, customs, which they follow and practice. But however, despite their variety in them, there are some apparent similarities. And one such similarity is found in their the music. Traditionally, this djembe drum was popularly played among many West African ethnic groups. And even now, that's something which is binding them. So the historical and cultural significance of the drum in this region have resulted in cementing its position as a symbol of the entire West Africa. And I would like to play this some small beats of this djembe drum, because so you'll be familiar with what exactly this music we're talking about, this djembe drum music of West Africa, because it later has a connotation when we discuss about diaspora, or the current West African diaspora, and how they connect themselves with the music, with the both host and the home countries. So I would like to play the initial part of this music.
No volume. Hello?
Oh, okay. Sorry, no volume. You're not, it's not audible. Is it audible?
No, ma'am.
Oh, it's not audible? Okay, 1 second. I'll just, okay. No volume. Okay. I'm not sure why there's no volume. It's okay. Can we just proceed?
Okay.
Yeah. Sao sir, you are not able to hear too?
We can't
Okay.
hear, ma'am. We can't hear,
right?
ma'am.
Yeah.
Can
no
you
problem.
please skip this video and we'll continue?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, fine. So fine. Basically, this I was just wanted to connect you with that music of the West Africa so that we can relate. At least you were able to view the djembe drums. That's enough. So with that we can connect later. Yeah. So now we move to the second part, that is migration and diaspora in the West Africa. We discuss about the past and the current trends. So the history of the West African migration and diaspora can be divided into three main periods. The first wave is the forced migration that occurred during the transatlantic slave trade between the 16th and 19th centuries, and where the European nations who were the colonial masters captured the African slaves by and large from the West Africa. And they were first brought to Europe and later on to the South and North America. It is estimated that about 12 million African slaves were shipped across the Atlantic. And this slave population, who were the early migrants from the West Africa, was largely responsible for constituting the first African community outside Africa. So for instance, if you look at this picture, the picture of how these trades were tied together and transported from West Africa to different parts of the world, largely to largely to European nations and also to the American land. And they were tied in this way and shipped in large ships and then transported across the world. So this was the first wave, which is largely a forced migration. And this slave population were the early migrants from West Africa, and they largely constituted this the first African community outside the Africa. So despite the forced migration from their own countries, their feeling of belongingness to Africa did not disappear. Rather, it became stronger. So this transatlantic slave trade contributed largely in creating huge community of West African origin in the American continent, especially in the United States and in Brazil. And due to the colonial rule, an important part of the West African diaspora is also found in European countries, namely France, United Kingdom, Portugal, Netherlands, Belgium, Italy, Germany, Spain, and other countries which had a colonial history with the African land. And I put up this picture for you to also have a feel that how this, during the first wave of migration, this Negroes or this Nigerians and this the West African population were actually auctioned. They were this was auction notice, which is which I found in the internet, which was used to buy and sell this population. To be sold on Thursday, 94 prime healthy, 24 women and 16 girls just arrived in . So they were kept in captive until they were sold. And once they were sold, like this ad is from United States. Once they were sold, it would be they would be transported in different parts of America or probably different parts of the world, depending upon where they were needed the most. So this was largely this first wave. And during the colonial rule, as I said, the French and the colonial rule in West Africa, the French and the British were the two dominant forces. You can see the French West Africa, where we have the huge French presence, and the red mark are the ones which are the places where British had their presence. British had their possessions. So largely French had a dominating presence during one part of the colonial period, that was in 1930s. And the second wave of migration from West Africa resulted during the late colonial period and early post-independence, that is from 1950s, largely due to the decolonization process. So migrants in huge number moved from Africa to Europe and thus became a part of an active African diaspora. So this diaspora was mainly the product of voluntary migrations, just opposite to what was the situation in the first wave. In the first wave, it was a forced migration. Here, the diaspora was mainly the product of voluntary migrations. People moved out of West Africa willingly. And many West Africans migrated to Europe and North America in search for better educational and employment opportunities. Political persecution was also a contributing factor for these African migrants to leave their homeland. The third wave of migration started from the 1980s and can be termed as the contemporary African diaspora. And during this wave, people left to different countries from West Africa to escape from the deplorable situations in their own countries, and due to political instability and also due to acute poverty. And the profiles of these migrants are diverse, and it includes individuals of all age groups, occupations, and hierarchies. Although they maintain deep economic and cultural ties with their homelands, they have no plans to return to their motherland. And this contemporary West African diasporas is varied in many ways. They were distinct from their predecessors, whose identity, which was either imagined by them or was imposed by others in terms of race, ethnicity, and sometimes religion too. And the new West African diasporas, besides they have the freedom, they also have to contend with another important notion, that is the concept of modern state, modern nation state, to which they belong in order to deal with the political and cultural essentials of their travel and network in this transnational space. This is a feature of the contemporary West African diaspora. So the West African migrations to European countries has raised considerably during the closing decades of 20th century, Britain and France, the old colonial superpowers, and many other countries host large number of West African diasporas. Recent study also contradict the conventional interpretations of West African migration being essentially driven by poverty, violence, and underdevelopment. And there are studies which argue that they're also driven by other aspects too, because due to the increasing income, education, access to information, and the West African migrants' capabilities and aspirations to migrate outside their own countries. So it is not just an push theory, it's also due to a pull theory aspect also. So there are different narratives and perspectives of the West African diaspora. See, we've completed the second part. We are moving to the narratives and discussions on the narratives and perspectives of the West African diasporas. As an academic field, this growth of West African diaspora studies has been uneven, and it looks like it's more stronger outside West Africa. And this is largely because the institutions of higher earnings are stronger and better resourced in the host lands than in most West African countries. And within the West African diasporas, there are remarkable differences between the North and South America, Atlantic and the non-Atlantic world, between the Anglophone, Francophone, and the Spanish scholarly world, just like the differences that exist between American and British academics in our current times. Linguistically, too, the production of diasporic studies and discourses are in diverse languages that include Portuguese, French, Spanish, besides English. And West Africa also is a home to Arabic and Asian languages, which is also a part of the languages of their diaspora too. So geographically, there is an involvement by scholars from different regions who are helping the expansion and the spread of the West African diasporic studies. And this is due to the formation of West African diaspora communities in different world regions and the various linkages between these communities and the West African countries. And this has eventually resulted in several interpretations and perspectives of this diaspora. So let's take one example. See, the West African slaves were shipped to Americas and were employed in plantations, mining zones, agriculture, and different spheres in the destination countries. And these captive slaves possessed a sense of ethnicity and culture, which are shaped largely by their African worldview, native African worldview. But their regional and cultural manifestations, such as dance, drumming, music, language, etc., suffered under the strict regulations by the plantation owners. So the drum was specifically outlawed when it was discovered that its rhythms could be used as a form of communication among the enslaved. So the drum, which you just happen to just see it, and probably we were not able to listen to it. So that became an issue for them, most of these colonial rulers. So the African tradition were transformed within the plantation environments in various places, depending upon the sanctions made by the colonial government. So several West Africans in North America modified their culture and traditions to be more acceptable to their owners. As a result, the African musical sensibilities were manured time and again. So thus there existed a variety of outward manifestation of African-derived culture among the diasporas. So this is just one example. So likewise, there are many examples where their own culture, African culture, was transformed, and the outward manifestation of their culture were interpreted in different forms and ways. The constant reinvention of the deeply rooted traditions of the Africans under descendants, especially in the Americas, has led to several interpretations of the West African diasporic worldviews. The Americanistic perspective on the period of Atlantic trade in the West Africa and its impact on the West African diaspora has increased considerably when compared to the African perspectives of the same. So largely, we have at least two perspectives, which is evident, that is the American perspective and the African perspectives. And largely, the American perspective is symbolically dominant for the reasons which is obvious. And the example of their dominance, presence, and the variations can be evident when they use, for instance, they use the slave trade and the African diaspora are used synonymously among the Americanist scholarly circles. But the research in West Africa demonstrates that Africanist view the trade as force of this, especially slave trade, as a force of change, driving socio-economic and political change among the Atlantic coast. Further, it also to be noted that the research carried out by the local archaeologists and the African scholars at African universities generally do not appear in the American or the European academic journals. Hence, their visibility is limited. And it is due to various factors like lack of resources, language constraints and prejudices, and other factors that disconnect the American and the West African researchers. And that impacts the perspectives and narratives also. So this has resulted in the inadequate dialogue and exchange of information among the scholars working on the West African diaspora, leading to multiple and contradictory views. And by and large, the West African diaspora studies have taken several forms. For instance, some scholars focus on identity and its expressions. Few others have focused on community action and heritage tourism, and likewise. Besides, it has also taken different directions, both linguistically and geographically, favoring adaptations and changing in local and regional communities. To really understand it, one requires a truly multi-regional approach to comprehend the multiple experiences of African communities during the Atlantic trade and beyond as in diasporic groups. So basically, one has to have an multi-regional approach to fully comprehend this experience of diasporic groups and then have a better understanding of it. So this was in brief over the different narratives and the perspectives that exist on the West African diaspora. So now we shall talk about the briefly about the contributions of the West African diasporas. So West African diaspora is quite popular and among the diaspora, and they are dynamically involved in the development process of Africa too, of not just West Africa, the entire Africa. This platform has kept the connection alive between the members of West African diaspora and their homeland. Diaspora remittances are used as a neoclassical tool to influence the socio-economic and socio-political decision-making processes in the West African countries by the donor countries and agencies. And the contributions of the West African diaspora is not only in economic sphere, but also in the politics and culture. Their contributions, particularly to the Pan-Africanism movement, has actually unified the cultural and the political world of the African diasporas, and also the self-determination of the people from Africa. Several countries of West Africa, namely Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, have launched plans to incorporate their diasporic communities as partners in development projects. So countries, namely Ghana, Mali, Nigeria, Senegal, have established institutions at the ministerial level to interact with the diaspora. The Economic Community of the West African States has proposed establishing a dedicated financial instrument at the regional level to facilitate business contributions of the diaspora to the region. And some West African countries are also using dual citizenship to deepen ties with the diaspora. They have given the nationals abroad the voting rights, and some have reserved specific number of seats in the parliament for diasporic representatives. These were the brief contributions. So even the recent developments, we can see that formation of the West African diaspora in Asia is a key development in the recent past. And in terms of the number, the West African diaspora in Asia may not be very significant. but they're most dynamic in terms of the impact they're having on their homelands. So these West African diasporas have a deep cultural impact in the host society in which they settle, and they're known to be well integrated in their host societies. The second generation, that is the children of the West African migrants born in Europe or US, tend to emphasize the European or the American part of the identity over their West African origin, while still feeling attached to the West Africa and claiming to be a part of the African people. So their identities are being reshaped and uprooted without necessarily being anchored in one specific culture. So this allows them to be able to relate in different ways to both their host and homeland, and to make an overall global impact through their contributions. Yeah, this was what we discussed till now was a brief about the overall contributions of the diaspora. And now we shall focus on the Ghanaian and Nigerian diaspora. Mostly these diasporas are more visible than others, and largely because there have been a central focus of diaspora studies among the scholars. And Ghana is historically known as Africa's Gold Coast, while Nigeria is nicknamed as Giant of Africa. And I think it's largely because of their positioning and also because of their size and various other factors which has contributed their presence. And the key drivers for migration among the diasporas, like for people to migrate from these countries, Ghana and Nigerian, to other countries, they largely migrate because of the higher wages in the destination country, secure employment, career advancement, access to improved facilities and technologies, and better political and economic circumstances when compared to their homelands. So these are the general broad views of the reasons why they migrate. But they have a huge diaspora. That's the reason why we've taken these particular cases, because we have huge Ghanaian and Nigerian presence in outside in different parts of the world. So we'll in today's session, for the interest of the time, we'll just discuss Ghanaian diaspora and probably have other discussions and open up for questions. And the studies indicate, it's very important to note that studies indicate that there is a narrow understanding of the term Ghanaian diaspora, because normally this Ghanaian diaspora is referring to only Ghanaian citizens who have left the country to reside in different parts of the world, such as North America and Europe. And they've largely neglected the huge number of Ghanaian communities who reside elsewhere in Africa. Even the definition by AU, it looks like it's focusing on those Africans who stay outside Africa. But there are many people who have moved from their own African countries and migrated to different African countries, which has not been documented. So that's one concern here, that the understanding of Ghanaian diaspora could be narrow, because they mostly may or may not include the citizens of Africa who have moved from the citizens of Ghana, people of Ghana who have moved to different parts of Africa. So, however, the overall report suggests that there are about 3 to 4 Ghanaians living in the diaspora in about 33 countries across the world. And over the years, Ghanaian migrants have established vibrant migrations networks with large communities in 5 countries, especially the USA, UK, Italy, Germany, and the Netherlands. And there are a large number of Ghanaians staying in the United States, and they live all across the US, but are heavily concentrated in New York, Virginia, New Jersey, and Maryland. And the large number of Ghanaian population also can be found in Europe, in countries like UK, Italy, Netherlands, Germany, Canada, etc. And they're also spread in Asian countries, Australian countries, and African countries. And they spread to the Asian countries, in fact, as a recent development. And these figures would likely to be much larger if even the undocumented migrants are included. So most of the times we don't have the data, especially the migration that occurs within the Africa. There's not much data available. So probably the number could have been much more bigger. So the education levels of this Ghanaian migrant diaspora range from highly educated and skilled professionals to the low skilled workers. And they largely constitute the educated middle class and the unskilled working class who have left the country during the turbulent years of political instability. And however, there's a trend among the Ghanaian diasporas, especially among the elites, to return back to their home country. And in recent years, we see that there's an inclination even among the middle and the working class Ghanaian migrants to return back to their countries. And several of these return professionals have become political and business elites. And Ghanaian diaspora has played a substantial role in political, social, and economic development of Ghana. And this part is very important too, because as the Ghanaian diaspora is spread in different parts of the globe, there are many subcategories within the diaspora which has emerged. It may be called as Ghanaian Australians, Ghanaian Americans, Ghanaian Canadians, Ghanaian British, etc., depending upon the destination country they reside in. And Ghanaian Americans are the popular ethnic groups in America. There are three main subcategories within the Ghanaian Americans, and they are known as Ghanaian immigrants to the United States, B, American people of Akan descent, and C, American people of Asante descent. So most Ghanaian Americans speak English, and they also speak other tribal languages like Akan, Ga, and three other Twi languages. And most of these Ghanaian Americans are easily have adapted themselves to their life in the United States because of the English language. And English language is also an official language of Ghana, and is spoken by the majority of the Ghana population. And if you notice, there are many very famous American personalities with Ghanaian descent. And one such personality we would like to discuss in today's class is about Jay Garte. He is from the Ghanaian descent, and he's a well-known musician. And we'll just discuss his case. So which also will tell us about the kind of contributions the diaspora make to the West African countries, to both home and host countries. So this is a case study of Jay Garte. He's an accomplished Ghanaian American music producer, singer, and a songwriter based in New York. He lives in New York. And Jay Garte was born in the United States to a Ghanaian father and a Canadian mother. His Ghanaian grandfather, Joseph Garte, was a poet, while his grandmother, Sabina Hope, was a famous West African singer. His father hails from a Fanta tribe. If you recollect, the Fanta was one of the tribes which was listed in the earlier slides. He hails from a Fanta tribe, and his ancestral areas include Ghana, Winneba, and Cape Coast. So Jay Garte moved to Accra. Although he was born in America, he moved to Accra in Ghana, where he spent several years studying music with his grandmother. And it was his grandmother who taught him the importance of singing with sincerity and from his soul, which later inspired him to make music his passion and profession. If you look at his music career, he began performing at the age of 10 as a rapper, and he was largely influenced by Ghanaian music. And he formed a group called Chief G and the Tribe that made him very popular. And he started his numbers started becoming popular. His debut album was released in 2011. That's called Shining Gold. And his other albums also include My Lady and the Papa. And the turning point of his career was his second album, Papa, which broke the boundaries with the music video. With music video being the first time a Ghanaian music video shown and premiered. So the Ghanaian music was actually displayed through his show. That was where he marked the boundaries. And in that context, it was a breaking point in his career. And although he settled in New York, he spent substantial time in Accra, in Ghana, where he records, produces, and directs videos. He's a co-owner and co-founder of GH Brothers in New York. And he describes his style as African rhythm and blues. So Jay has won several awards, such as Best Male Video, Best Afro Pop Song, Ghana Music Awards, Best New Artist, Young Influential Africans by the Face of Africa, and in several other award ceremonies. So actually, I wanted to also play some of his video, at least a part of it, I'm not very sure which is audible. Let me try a bit. So this is Jay Carter's album, So Wild. And the reason why I wanted to show display this music to you is he uses the same Demjay drum, which we discussed in the initial part of our session. So that's how his music is a little distinct and has a West African finish. Let me tell me if it's audible. 1 second. Was it audible?
No, madam, no.
Okay, no problem. I just wanted you to
No.
at least, yeah, it was not audible, right? Yeah. Were you able to see the images of the drums?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello? Yes, right? Yeah. So, yeah, that is what I wanted to say. The point I was trying to make here was that Jay's Garte's album, at least this album displays that drums, and most of his albums has an West African music finish, musical genres finish, or his music is distinct that displays the West African music, the culture from West Africa. So, and even later, this multiple award-winning Ghanaian Afro-pop star has committed to spread Ghanaian culture through his music, and he states that he is inspired by the Ghanaian music. See, he did not know, he was not familiar with Ghanaian music because he was not born there. He was born in America, but then later when he went to visit his grandparents in Ghana, in West Africa, he learned it, and then he was inspired by it. And then later he states and makes a commitment that he wants to use his music to attract US and the attention of the world, because he felt that Ghanaian music has so much essence, but it's been understated and has not been, the world doesn't know about the Ghanaian music. So his commitment to project African culture is endeavoring, and several of his songs have African cultural settings, exhibits African fashion and the value system, etc. So Jay's childhood dream was to spread Ghanaian music across the world, and he is fulfilling that goal. And he has another interesting track titled Kweku. Kweku is another track. For instance, it is tied to an Akan legend, Kweku's superior knowledge and wisdom. In this track, he highlights the attributes and importance associated with the local names, as they have powerful meanings. Basically, he highlights the importance of why it is important to have these local names, or the names of, we have this names or the surnames we have tied up, and the names of their locality, because they have powerful meanings associated with it. And he made an album attributing the importance of it. And I guess you may not be able to watch it, but just see the initial part, because it highlights the African cultural settings. That's most important for us. So this is Jay's album, where in his album Kweku, he showcases the West African culture. Okay, this is Jay's album, which showcases his culture, basically about the kingdoms, the regimes, and the pompous show, which had its own significance, and he brings that into picture through his music. So Jay is besides showcasing the African culture, West African culture, Jay also uses the power of his voice to connect Ghana with other African countries. For instance, he teamed up with a singer Juliana from Uganda. Juliana is a singer from Uganda, and she's an East African sensation. And he teams up with her, and with a remix of his own number, My Lady. See, both the artists are extremely proud of their culture and heritage, and they're passionately using their music to unite the two countries of both Uganda and Ghana, who are otherwise or always in a conflict. So Jay is also known for using his power to connect many African countries and bring peace. So in 2020, he released African Money, which was a new sensation to the Afrobeat scene. And in his quest to use his music to unite Africa, Jay has successfully combined 6 different languages, that is Yoruba, Ga, Twi, and Hausa, Pidgin, and African slang on a single track, and thereby initiating and providing a fresh direction to the Afrobeat. This is interesting. So in that sense, he's distinct on his own. So basically, Jay's music has a universal appeal and captures African sentiments across the globe. He has created a genre of African music which is distinctly his own. And his siblings are also involved with music and rap, and his family, Jay's family, along with the siblings and the entire family, have various charities and philanthropy projects, both in the New York, in the host, and also in the home countries in Ghana. His father, Kuweko Garte, is the father of Garte. He was actually a doctor who died of cancer in 2017. And Jay, actually, in order to nurse his father, took an extended break from his career in order to make sure that he serves his father and is with him during his last stages. And if you recollect, the Kuweku title is the same title which Jay has made a number. He's made his album. So basically, Jay's life reflects the sentiments of Ghanaian diaspora, the contradictions and the challenges of living in multiple cultural settings, seeking for approval and recognition in both home and host countries. Jay's life also reflects commitment and passion to serve the motherland. So this is what we can take from these case studies, which could be useful to us as a student of diaspora. So in terms of broadly summing up and concluding, we actually tried to focus on the West African diaspora, did our best to try to understand West African diaspora who are spread outside Africa and their contributions. And broadly, West African diaspora can be divided into 3 main categories, that is diasporas of the colonization process, diasporas of the decolonization process, and the diasporas resulting from the struggle for independence and during the structural adjustment due to the disruption of the colonial conquests, which can be largely termed as a contemporary diaspora or the new diaspora. And in other words, the West African diaspora includes diasporized West Africans, West African diasporas that includes a long-term West African born residents of the diaspora host lands, and their offsprings who turn into African diasporas. Clearly, there are several diasporas within the West African diaspora, which explains the complexity and the diversity of the West African diasporas. Within the West African diaspora, there's remarkable differences between the North and South America, Atlantic and the non-Atlantic world, between the Anglophone, Francophone, and the Spanish scholarly worlds, just like the differences we have between American and British academics. And in contemporary times, Africa is a center of any discussion of the diaspora and has created intense debate among the scholars. Here, when I say Africa, West Africa is a center of the discussion of the diaspora and has created intense debate among the scholars. And the debate is whether West African diaspora remains connected directly to Africa as indicated by their cultural retentions of the West Africans, which demonstrates firm linkages between Africa and the diaspora unaffected by slavery, or whether diaspora means something else, with its members impacted by the social, cultural, and economic legacies of slavery and colonialism in the America, as by their ancestral homes in the African continent. The answer could be somewhere in the middle, depending upon the particular situation and how sustainable the relationship between African and the destination country of the migrant is. And one requires a truly multi-regional approach to grasp the multiple experiences of the African communities during the Atlantic trade and beyond as a diaspora group. So with this note, I would like to conclude the session. I'd be happy to keep it open for discussions or any questions and clarifications if you have. Please feel free.
Deepthi, I am here. If there is no question, we can conclude. But I think we have Vijaya, Swadesh, Nirmal, Manish. If there are any questions from anyone of you, please.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think no question. Others can also view this video afterwards. And so thank you, Dr. Deepthi, for such a very informative talk. And maybe we look forward to your more, lectures in the future.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Sahu. Thank you for this opportunity.
Okay. Deepthi, I'll talk to you afterwards.